Good evening, saints of God. May the blessings of the Lord continue to be with you. Today we are continuing on our journey, which God has established us in. And I believe that we are receiving help from above to conquer in all things. We concluded on creation of streams of income yesterday. And please, you must not forget that it's very important. It's very essential. If you do want financial development, you must work on establishing systems that create wealth. Now, excuse me. Now, we're going to look at something else today. From the book of Genesis, chapter number 12, verse number 10. And we're going to look at some strategies which are there in the Word of God, where people lived and they overcame times of famine or upheaval in those days. So we're going to look at Genesis chapter 12, verse number 10, which says, "Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was severe in the land." I'll read that again. "Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was severe in the land." I'll read again. "Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was severe in the land." So Abram was in a certain location, because remember, God has spoken to him, and he says, "Move from the land where you are and go to a land where I will show you." So after a certain period of time, Abraham will be found in a certain place. And when he is found in a certain place, he may stay there for days, or he may be located there for a longer period of time, for a short period of time, or he may just be passing through. So before we got to verse 10, the Bible tells us that Abram was in a place called Shechem. And in that territory, he went to a mountain which was east of Bethel. And there he pitched his tent. And then Bethel was on his west, and Ai on his east, or Ai on his east. And then from there, he went towards the south. Another version will say he went towards the Negev. Now the Bible then says in verse 10, there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there. This is the man that God has spoken to. And the word is telling us that there was a famine in the land, and Abraham went down to Egypt to dwell there. So it may mean that Egypt was more resourced, well able to handle the famine. It may also mean that the impact of the famine was far less reaching in Egypt. It was far less impactful in Egypt than where Abraham was. So he identified a nation, a physical location where he would escape the effects of the famine. This is Abraham. He's not saying, I heard the voice of God. He's not saying, God said that he would bless me and make me a blessing and make my name great. That same man who heard God, when the time or a time for famine came, he went to Egypt. He identified a place, a nation, a physical territory where he would escape the effects of the famine. One of the ways we can target to overcome famine is relocation. I said we have to look at biblical strategies. And this is a clear biblical strategy. We can't avoid to talk about it because it is wisdom which is present, which was used by Abraham. Physical relocation as a strategy to overcome a famine. Because there are times, okay, we will get to see that there are different ways to relocate physically. Okay? There are different ways to relocate in the physical. It's not only one way, there are different ways where one can relocate. Now, there are times when one can avoid. We're seeing that Abraham was trying to avoid to bear the full impact of a famine through relocation. He was trying to mitigate and to reduce the impacts of a famine by identifying another location where he would dwell. He has not yet found the place where God said, this is the land where I want you to go. So when the famine comes, the famine then comes against him before he is established or before he has been found in a very clear location which he can say, this is the city which God has led me to. And because that is not the fixed location that God had given him, he opts to say, because I have not yet established something in terms of building a city or being where God wants me to be in terms of physical location, let me go to Egypt. There are times when one can avoid the full impact of a famine through physical relocation. There are times when in Egypt can be a place of refuge for you and a place prepared and ready to assist you to escape the effects of a famine. And it needs to be understood that sometimes physical locations, territories, can become a place of refuge. When there was a financial crisis in Zimbabwe, and things began to be unsettled, things began to go down. You saw many people migrating from Zimbabwe to the United Kingdom, um, Australia, the USA, Germany, Cyprus, South Africa, Zambia, and some of them have been successful, and you are also among them. So you cannot ignore this strategy when you used it. That strategy you used to say, let me move from where I am, Abraham also used it. So don't see that wisdom which you applied as you being the first one and only one to use it. The first one recorded clearly for us to see was Abraham. He relocated himself physically so that he can fight off or mitigate or reduce the impact of the famine. The famine was heavy upon the land, and Abraham found himself going to Egypt. And some of you have found good success, which you would not normally have found if you had remained and not migrated. So some of you, the key to your continuous success may be understanding the time of your migrations, the time of your relocations. Because migration or physical relocation can be wisdom tied to a season. It can be wisdom tied to a season which has a financial crisis. Because, I'll say it again, relocation or migration, because now as we are nearing the conclusion of our lessons, we want to look at how then can one overcome, how then can one mitigate the impact of, let's say there is a financial crisis, a global financial crisis, or a territorial, or regional, national financial crisis. How do you mitigate such impacts? How do you mitigate the effects of such shakings? What do you do? So you'll find that relocation can be wisdom for such a season because, like we said, opportunities are connected to locations, and presenting yourself in a location which is built to withstand the effects of a famine can help you to overcome in such a time. I hope you're following me there. Opportunities are connected to locations, and presenting yourself in those locations which are built or which have ability and capacity to withstand the effects of a famine can help you to overcome. This strategy cannot necessarily work for everyone, but it can work. And for some of you, it is working and has worked. But relocation should never be done randomly. It must be well prepared for. It must be well prepared for. It must be well comprehended. It must be thoroughly understood because there are costs tied to relocation. There are costs tied to relocation. I'm not only talking about financial costs. There are costs tied to relocation. Yes, financial costs, but there are many other implications that come with having to move from another territory, going to another territory. I don't know if we'll have time to look at that, to understand, the effects that come with relocations and things like that. But it must never be done randomly. So, now, let me say this. It must never be done randomly. It must be thoroughly prepared for. It must have the seal of God's approval. It must have the seal of God's approval. It must have the seal of God's approval. So never must it be done to just say, I've just thought of relocating to this, or I've just thought of going to this place. No. Thorough considerations must be done. Abraham went down to Egypt to dwell there. He's not an Egyptian. He's not an Egyptian. He is not an Egyptian. But he went down to Egypt to dwell there. I remember saying during a youth it was a young adults camp. And I say to them, some of you would have married or should have been married by now had you been back home. Some of you would have married, as of course as guys, or should have been married as ladies if you had relocated. Because sometimes environments become limitations, and their environments which become opportunities. Sometimes environments become limitations, and then there are environments which are full of opportunities. So he went to dwell there, but he's not an Egyptian. He's not an Egyptian. He's not an Egyptian. So now, these are some of the things that you can look at. Let's say you are relocating to another country. One of the costs is the cost of having to learn the culture, the language, the culture and the languages of another land. It's the cost of it. Needs time then to learn the language. It needs time also to adjust to the system of the land. What is required of you there? What is required of you there? So these are certain things that you then have to consider. Understanding how is it going to, what is it going to take for you to be accepted formally in the system as a taxpayer? What procedures and how long, what is needed, what is required for you to access the requisite paperwork for you to legitimately work and live there. These are all costs. These are all the costs which are connected to relocation, but some of them are very much worth it. We are living in a globalized environment where your skill can make room for you or can be accepted in a more developed environment. So you must not be myopic in your view, because you never know how many years of just being in a certain nation, a certain environment, how many years it can take you to reach a certain financial level, where it might take you 5 years here, it may take you a year and a half there. But because we are afraid of going out of our comfort zones, we become myopic in our view, we become limited in our view. We have a world view like we are already in our land, when actually you are here because you migrated. And who said this is the end of your migratory journey? I'm just asking questions, okay? I'm asking questions. It's not a command, it's not an instruction. It's a teaching which is opening your eyes. Abraham relocated. Abraham relocated. What about you? You did so. Why did you do that? You were doing it to mitigate the impacts of a financial crisis. You were migrating to a land with potentially better opportunities. So it's something which is very complex. But then the question then is, what do you do? Let's say this is a global crisis. By global, we mean these are things that can start in in bigger nations, the more attractive nations, the nations that one may look to relocate to. How then do you operate? How then do you move? This is when then now the voice of God becomes clear, because the truth is, in uncertain seasons, actually you need the voice of God to guide you, because the place which may not be attractive to you may be the relocative place which carries your breakthrough for that season. It may be actually the place which carries the breakthrough for that season. It may actually be the place that carries the breakthrough for that season. Genesis 45. I'll read from verse 16 to 18. Genesis 45, from verse 16 to 18. Genesis 45, from verse 16. As soon as the news reached Pharaoh's palace that Joseph's brothers had arrived, Pharaoh and his servants were happy, ecstatic, joyful. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, say unto your brethren, this do here. Lade your beasts and go. Get you unto the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households, and come unto me, and I will give you the good of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat the fat of the land. Chapter 46, verse 5. And Jacob rose from Beersheba, And the sons of Israel carried Jacob their father, and their little ones, and their wives, in the wagons which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. And they took their cattle and their goods, which they had gotten in the land of Canaan, and came into Egypt, Jacob, and all his seed with him, his sons, and his sons' sons with him, his daughters, and his sons' daughters, and all his seed brought he with him into Egypt. Now, let's also read. Let's also read, I think, chapter 47. Chapter 47, from verse 5. And Pharaoh spake unto Joseph, saying, Thy father and thy brethren are come unto thee. The land of Egypt is before thee. In the best of the land, make thy father and brethren to dwell. In the land of Goshen, let them dwell. And if thou knowest any man of activity among them, then make them rulers over my cattle. Verse 11. And Joseph placed his father and his brethren, and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph, verse 12, nourished his father and his brethren, and all his father's household with bread, according to their families. Now listen to this. Prior to the revelation that Joseph was still alive, Jacob sent his son to buy grain that they may survive during the famine. But when they found out that Joseph was still alive, by the divine mercies of God, instead of then them going from Canaan to Egypt to buy grain, and then coming from Egypt to Canaan so that they can then make use of the grain, they went to where the grain was. So instead of having temporary access to where the opportunities were, because yes, it can happen that in a time of financial uncertainty, you can identify a location which you frequent. By frequent, I mean a location which you have access to, but you don't necessarily dwell there. You can operate there, you can trade there, you can lodge there for a short period of time. Then you come from there, you go back to your place of establishment. It can be a strategy also, but it may not allow you to make full use of the benefits of Egypt. You know, Egypt has grain, so you go there, you trade for a few days, then you come back, and then you are set for a season. You can outsource your skills, outsource your work, get contract work for a time. You go there for 2 months, you go there for a short period of time, then you come back to your place with your harvest. Taking your business idea, your skill, what you're offering into that environment, you get your harvest. There you come back. But in this case now, they then found they had access to Joseph. And eventually, because of that high level connection, they had access to the best of the land. They were given their own place, so they could grow, they could increase, they could operate in their knowledge of being shepherds. And even Pharaoh offered that if these guys are very skilled, they can also look after my cattle. So now they have potentiality of reward, which is coming from straight from the palace. Now they can become even employees of the thriving government and administration of Egypt. In a From a Canaan where they were not being directly being paid a salary for keeping their own sheep, keeping their own flocks. Now they go to Egypt. Pharaoh says, if there are any active or skilled men among you, they can among your people, they can watch over my cattle. It means there's a potentiality for reward there. So new environments can bring up new opportunities. New environments can bring up new opportunities. What are you using the internet for? Are job searches only limited to the country you are in? New environments present new opportunities. It's obviously a big decision because, like I said, relocations, they come at different levels. You can move from one country to another, as you have done. You can move from one province to another. You are in the same country. You can move from one city to another city. As we're saying, you can move from one town to another town. Levels, classes of relocation differ. Others with more, um, others with lesser implications than the other. You know, um, so because of different scales of relocations, you may find that your decision may be impacted by, like I said, the cost. And when I say cost, it's not just financial. The implications of your relocation, the advantages of your relocation. You'll find that all of those things, they then figure what is God saying, because it may be attractive, but God is saying no. It may look fruitful. It may have a great opportunity for you. Must I always go to a place where I found opportunity? No, it doesn't work like that. Because these different scales of locations at a national, city, maybe even town, community level, they offer different opportunities and they offer different wealth vectors than your present location. We cannot move from the truth that prosperity is connected to physical environments and the influences which can happen to shake things in those physical environments. They can impact on your prosperity. Abraham, the one whom God spoke to, had to physically relocate in a time of famine. There was a time when farmers left the nation of Zimbabwe because it was not physically safe for them and they no longer had ownership security. And they left to go to other nations which accepted them, like Zambia. So are they not wise? No, they are wise because they understand where it is safe for them to thrive and to prosper. Their economy has been shaken. Their system of making money, which God has given them and which they know has been disturbed. What do? They look for a place with better opportunities. Some of you, your struggle is the voice of God to relocate. I will never tell you this if I always want you around me, seeing you, having you pay your tithe, having you give to God, just having you as a number and a member in church. Some of you interpret your stagnancy. Interpret the grace which is in you may be calling for manifestation in a different location. It may be calling. So you may need to interpret it well, but it's not for everyone. It's not for everyone. 2 Kings chapter number 8. 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 Tomorrow definitely I'll explain some of the, I'm having to write it down now, the costs which you need to consider when making a relocation decision. So some of this information, most of this information, God had given me long time, some time back. So it's not just some things that I'm thinking but this one, of course, I think we may need just to touch it, look at it practically, because we're learning. It's a class. So we look at the scriptures, and then we make it very practical, and we make it identify to very much to our present. 2 Kings chapter number 8. 2 Kings chapter number 8. Should I start from there? Okay, before I go to chapter 8, let's read it's connected, but let's read chapter number 2 Kings. We're still in 2 Kings. I just need to chapter 4. Now I'll summarize 2 Kings chapter 4. Elisha meets a noble woman, a Shunammite. She and her husband begin to minister to him. They'll give him a place to stay and, to eat bread, sleep over. And then they built an upper room for him. A relationship was established with an anointed man. Okay? And eventually, Elisha prophesied, the woman conceived, the woman had a son. 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 18. And when the child was grown, it fell on a day that he went out to his father to the reapers. And he said unto his father, My head, my head. And he said to a lad, Carry him to his mother. And when he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her knees till noon and then died. And she went up and laid him on the bed. She laid him on the bed of the men of God and shut the door upon him and went out. And she called unto her husband and said, Send me, I pray thee, one of the young men and one of the donkeys, that I may run to the men of God and come again. So in a summation, okay, let me just read. And he said, Wherefore will you go to him today? It's neither new moon nor Sabbath. Then she said, It shall be well. Then she prepared the donkey and said to her servant, Drive and go forward. Slack not thy riding for me, except I tell you. So she came unto the men of God to Mount Carmel, and it came to pass, when the men of God saw her afar off, that he said to Gehazi his servant, Behold, yonder is that Shunammite. So in a nutshell, the Shunammite told her, This is what has happened to the child. Elisha sent Gehazi with his staff. Okay, Gehazi went, laid the staff upon the face of the child. There was no voice, no hearing. Gehazi went back and said, "The child is not awaked." And when Elisha was coming into the house, verse 32, behold, the child was dead and laid upon his bed. He went in therefore and shut the door upon them twain and prayed unto the Lord. And he went up and lay upon the child and put his mouth upon his mouth and his eyes upon his eyes and his hands upon his hands. And he stretched himself upon the child, and the flesh of the child waxed warm. Then he returned and walked in the house to and fro, and went up and stretched himself upon him. And hear this, and the child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. The child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. Let's go now to 2 Kings chapter 8, verse 1. Hear this. Then spake Elisha unto the woman whose son he had raised to life, saying, Arise, and go thou and thine household, and stay wherever you can stay, or sojourn wherever you can sojourn. Arise, go thou and thine household, and sojourn wherever you can sojourn. For the Lord hath called for a famine, and it shall come upon the land 7 years. And the woman arose and did after the saying of the man of God. And she went with her household and sojourned in the land of the Philistines 7 years. Hear me. Elisha says to the Shunammite, because, get this, sometimes understanding of seasons may not directly come to you, but it may come through you, through a servant of God or through one who is connected to God. It can come through you through various sources of information. It may not directly come to you as your own personal revelation, but it can come through you through other means, through other people who may not necessarily be men of God. But the key is you have received the interpretation of a season which is coming. But get this, Elisha says to the woman, arise, go and stay in a place where you can stay. We'll talk about that. For the Lord has called a famine upon the land for 7 years. Okay, going back to 2 Kings chapter 4. Remember, in waking up the child, Elisha laid on him. And when the child, or as the child was waking up, the child sneezed 7 times. So automatically there, Elisha understood that there is a famine that is going to come. The child sneezed 7 times. But in the sneezing of the child, there was a delivery of a message. It may be hard to understand, but sometimes that's how spiritual things work. 7 times the child sneezed. And Elisha knew a famine is going to come for 7 years. Hey. And he didn't automatically tell the woman. He waited. He gave the woman the son. He didn't say it. When now he had understanding of the timing and he knew it was close, he then said, Arise, you and your family. Arise, you and your family. He didn't say it when he raised the child. He said it after a period of events or a period of time had passed. And then he says to her, I'll read the ISV version. You must get up and leave with your household to go live wherever you can, because the Lord has called for a famine, and it's going to come on the land for 7 years. The Lord has called for a famine, and it's going to come upon the land for 7 years. 7 years. 7 sneezes. 7 years. So the man interpreted the season, the message, and then he understood the timing. And then he tells her, it's time for you to relocate. He didn't give her an option. He said, go. Because you may be found in a location or an environment and territory which you were never supposed to be in at the time of the coming of the famine. He himself, Elisha, is not going anywhere. But he may be understanding the situation of the Shunammite woman and their family, her husband and their family, and the considerations of their abilities, capabilities. If the husband is a farmer, if the husband's economy is based on agriculture, the next 7 years are going to be 7 years of very much decreased income for him. So looking at what they are doing, Elisha says, arise, you and your family. Make a choice, because there's a famine coming upon the land of Israel. So go anywhere else, but don't be found in Israel. This was non-specific, a non-specific instruction in terms of giving them a location to go. He allowed them to choose, and they chose the land of the Philistines. Because this is important, because if you then don't understand the timing when you should enact and make certain decisions, it's like when Elijah told Ahab, get ye down from the mountain now, go to the city, get ye thee to Jezreel, lest the rain overtake you. You may be found overtaken by the famine before you shift. And now, when you shift, when the famine has begun to manifest, there is competition of migration. But shifting in the birth time, which allows you to settle before the famine hits, gives you an advantage of time. You then can benefit from your decision, which you will make. And even restrictions which can then come to hinder mass migration will not affect you, because you made your move before the time of the famine. So relocation has to be understood when. If it's the highest level of moving to another country, when? When? Because if you delay it, you may miss the advantages thereof, and it can become very difficult for you. So Elisha brought the understanding. He brought the interpretation of the season and the wisdom of what to do. Go wherever you can, you and your household. Like I said, relocation has different implications. Sometimes relocation can involve the relocation of the breadwinner, and then the rest of the family stays put. It can involve the movement of the whole family or the breadwinner. There are different considerations. But this one, he said, you and your household, you have to relocate. You and your household, you have to move. Go wherever you can. So relocation comes with demands, and it requires capacity. That's why it should be a product of wise decision making, divinely led decision making, so that it becomes not just a well calculated risk, but a divinely instituted decision. Because remember, it's not, I want you also to see that it's not the devil who brought the famine. It's God who ordained it. And Elisha rightly said, the Lord has ordained the famine. The Lord has ordained the famine. So sometimes you can then be found in an environment which the Lord has called for a famine. You then need wisdom to thrive in that environment. So this is a beginning or in the introduction into the first part of in the Bible. What are the practical wisdoms which we see, or practical manifestations of wisdom which we see? Some of it is practical to the effect that you have applied it. You are living it. Relocation. So we're going to continue with relocation tomorrow. For now, for today, it's enough. But relocation needs to be considered. And the level of considerations, they differ because of the scales of relocation. Am I moving to another city? Am I moving to another town? Am I just moving in the same environment but just to another place, but in generally the same location? What are the scales of relocation that I'm considering? Where have I found opportunity? Where have I seen opportunity? You need to understand all that. And tomorrow we'll continue looking at the biblical recordings of relocations that are there in scripture in attempts to overcome a famine. And also, as God allows, we'll look at some of the costs, if I can put it like that, of relocations. And then we take it from there. God bless you, my son. God bless you, my daughter. Enjoy this lesson. Make sure time and again the other lessons you are listening to them, because like I said, we're concluding next week by Friday, or we may extend up to Monday, after next week. Monday as the last lesson, depending on if I've exhausted everything. But by Friday I should be done. If we go beyond that, it's because more is coming, or I have exhausted what God has given me to tell you. So please keep meditating on all of these things. But definitely we're working towards our conclusion. God bless you.